This is Charles Booth on the left, and he didn't believe that there was a lot of poverty in Britain in the 19th century. And in the end, he set up a programme where he and his researchers knocked on every single door in London. This is the East End of London. I don't know if you have that programme called EastEnders on television. Mm-hmm. Yes? No? Yes? No? Any of you seen it?
No.
No? Nobody's seen it? Some people seen it? Okay, well you are in the East End, where that fictitious place, Walford, doesn't exist, but this is kind of really absolutely Bromley by Bow. So if you've seen EastEnders, you get a feel for what this community is like. This is a map of where EastEnders is, if you see what I mean. Bromley by Bow's up here. So this map was done, they knocked on every single door in London. It took them years and years to do this. And they had these tremendously detailed Victorian maps, and they colour-coded every single house that's shown on there against the level of income that they thought was in that household. And in the report, this was called the semi-vicious criminal classes. Okay? And of course, there are lots of these in East London, 120 years ago, 130 years ago. This was a population of 600,000 people at the time. Interesting bit of history. I don't know what has determined how London is to do with the way the wind blows. So the wind in Britain predominantly blows from the west to the east. So the west side of London, Kensington and Chelsea and all of that, is where the very wealthy people live. And then they have their playground, it's called the West End, with all the cinemas and theatres and everything else. And then you have the traditional city of London where the banks were. And then you have the East End. The East End is where all the new migrants come to. So the East End received huge numbers of Jewish people fleeing persecution in Tsarist Russia. Prior to that, it received the Huguenots fleeing religious persecution in northern France. And then in the mid-1970s, it received tens of thousands of Bangladeshis who were displaced by the war of independence in Bangladesh. So this borough has gone through being, quite a wide working class borough. Lots of Irish migrants working in the docks. This was at the rise of empire, of course. Britain was, the wealthiest country in the world. The docks were hugely important. There was a time when Liverpool had more lawyers than London, for example, and it was all to do with shipping contracts. So this became a hugely important part of London, 600,000 people living in absolute abject poverty. There's a wonderful book, if any of you want to read it. It's called The People of the Abyss, written by the American journalist Jack London in about 1901. He talks about all the streets of Tower Hamlets and the absolute terrible, terrible, terrible poverty that was here. Now, if we go fast forward 130 years, this is a map of deprivation today. You will see that Tower Hamlets has remained a tremendously poor borough. Some interesting things happened here. So this was the time of, this predates deindustrialisation. So this is when shipping, so London was a working port, huge ships coming into London, and then the ships got much bigger with containers. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the container ships couldn't come into London, they're too big, so they moved the port way out near the sea. And East London lost 100,000 jobs when the port moved. So it was a disaster for East London. This is mid-1980s. And then joined by, in the mid-1950s, 60s, and then joined in the mid-1970s by mass migration from Bangladesh of a community from rural Bangladesh who didn't speak English, maybe had little more than primary schooling. So not literate in their own language, not speaking English as well. Very, very difficult situation, and we've just lost 100,000 jobs. That was the situation in which Bromley by Bow was born, this organisation. A very young priest arrived here in 1984 to this church, a 200-seater traditional church. The darkened windows, you couldn't really see in, it was very old-fashioned, and he arrived here to find a congregation of 12 old people and £400 in the bank. That was all that there was here in 1984. Everything that you see, and I'll take us for a trip around these buildings, everything that you see here today has been created not by the state, but by this community. So this community has created an organisation to develop the provision, partly based on needs, but I think your question over there about what matters to people is absolutely critical. The state often thinks about, the state looks at all of this stuff. Low income, high unemployment, poor health, disability, low levels of skills and qualifications, poor housing, environmental deprivation, crime. So the state looks at all of these things and says, oh dear, this is a disaster, we need to provide services, we need to do this, we need to do that. Of course, that's all true, but it's not how people feel about their lives, it's not how people feel about their community, and it doesn't really capture the creativity and the energy inside of people to make change. And so for us, we think that part of the problem is the way that we look at how to change communities, and that often tends to come out of a government department, a government policy paper, a whole set of initiatives that the government brings along that are largely meaningless to the community and from which the community will often not really benefit very much. If you want to change communities, it has to be the communities themselves that change themselves. It's not going to come from government. And one of the interesting things for us is looking at government policies. I mean, I don't know if you know this, there's this terrible statistic that in Britain, a government minister, a departmental minister in central government, will be in their job for a shorter time than the life expectancy of somebody who's been diagnosed with colon cancer. Yeah? So, less than 2.5 years. That's how long ministers stay in their jobs in Britain. And they all see it as their job to bring in a new policy, to tear up all the old policies and bring in a new policy. And so you just get wave after wave after wave of policies and new initiatives. And even before the initiative has really started to have any traction at all, you've got another initiative comes along. And these ministers are leaving their jobs even before the things that they put into place even start to happen sometimes. It's absolutely crazy. So for an organisation like ours that is rooted in this community, the critical thing always to ask ourselves is what works for this community? So you can draw a sort of line of Margaret Thatcher and John Major and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and David Cameron and Theresa May and all of their ministers all bringing about different policies. Our job is to find a line right down the middle and say what works for our community and which of these policies do we want to engage with and which of them do we think are nonsense or which do we think will last about a year and then something else will happen. So let's not get too excited about this new initiative because we've put a lot of effort into this. By the time we've done that, it will have all changed anyway. So you have to have a really strong root within the community to understand what really makes sense for this community and how you might, yes, sure, absolutely, we need to get hold of government money, but how do we do that in a way that really makes sense for this community? I mean, interestingly, I guess we've been here for, well, if you count the church, we've been here for almost a couple of 100 years now. The charity for 34 years. So our roots are very deep in this community. And I think that's really, really important in this day and age. Okay, let's just... Now, we show this to the medical people because this is not deprivation, the last one was, this is diabetes. But all we're trying to do is show to the medical profession that illness is caused by deprivation. This is really what causes diabetes is deprivation. What causes obesity is deprivation. What causes heart disease is deprivation. What causes respiratory disease is deprivation. What causes mental illness is deprivation. And so if we want to tackle these health issues, we have to tackle deprivation. So Michael Marmon, this fantastic fellow here, whoa, there we go, him. He wrote a tremendous report Sadly, it's not the first report of its kind. These reports seem to get written about every 10 years. He probably wrote the best. He's a global authority on what's called health inequality. Yeah? And actually his cousin is one of our doctors here. So the Marmot thesis is very, very simple. Socio-economic inequality creates health inequality. Now, I guess you don't need to be a genius to work that out. The poorer you are, the worse your health will be, and the earlier you will die. I guess we could have all worked that out without doing a study. But Michael Marmot created a study that scientifically proves that. The next thing is the hardest thing for the health system certainly to understand, which is if socioeconomic inequality creates health inequality, what do you then do? And I've read so many government reports that say socioeconomic inequality creates health inequality, therefore we need a better health system. The answer is no, we don't need a better health system. We need to tackle socioeconomic inequality. So the health system doesn't understand what to do with this thesis, and dare I say it, we have a government that doesn't really care. In fact, quite the opposite. We have a government who has deliberately brought about policies over the last 45 years to increase socio-economic inequality. The coalition government, David Cameron's government and Theresa May's government, who's just resigned, we've got elections, so the last 7 years, the austerity policies of the last 7 years have been about creating greater inequality, taking money from the poor and giving the money to the wealthy. And the outgoing Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, who was part of David Cameron's team, brought about a whole series of policies to reduce social benefits for people with disabilities, people who are unemployed, all sorts of people who've got additional needs, and including what we call in Britain tax credits. So if you're earning very low income, you get money from your employer, but some money from the state as well, to bring up your income a bit. For people who are earning very, very low income, they reduce, well, they're called tax credits. So in addition, in your pay packet each month, as well as your wages from your employer, you get some money from the government to bring up your wages. They reduce these tax credits. The policy that George Osborne put into place a year ago about reducing tax credits means that in Britain the number of children in poverty, which is currently 4 million, in 4 years' time will be 5 million. Last year it went up by 200,000, so it went from 4 million to 4,200,000. This year it will go to 4,400,000, next year to 4,600,000, 4,800,000, 5 million, 5,200,000. So this is an absolutely understood consequence of this policy. It's not that they don't understand this is going to happen, they know it's going to happen, but they don't care. Yeah. They say this will incentivize people to get a job.